The terror began when I was 8 years old. The autumn, my family moved to the old Victorian house on Maple Street after my father's job relocation. My new bedroom, tucked away on the second floor with slanted ceilings that created odd shadows, felt like stepping into someone else's nightmare rather than claiming my own sanctuary. When I was 8 years old, I learned fear had a sound, a slow drag of something across the floor. From the first night, I became convinced that something lived in that space. Not the typical childhood monsters that my friends sometimes mentioned, nothing with claws or fangs or glowing eyes. The creak of wood that shouldn't be moving. The faint sound of breathing. And it always came from the same place, under my bed. This presence felt different, more intelligent and purposeful. I would lie awake listening to sounds that seemed too deliberate to be random.
Go away, please, go away.
But as weeks turned into months, and my terror of bedtime only intensified, I never saw its face. I never wanted to, but I knew it was alive. And worse, it knew I was, too. As I grew older, the fear evolved, but never fully disappeared. In middle school, I learned to rationalize it as residual childhood trauma related to the stress of my brother's ongoing medical treatment. High school brought new coping strategies. I convinced myself that the presence I sensed was simply the house's history manifesting through my overactive imagination. I researched the property's background and discovered that several families had lived there over the decades, including children who had grown up in my bedroom. Perhaps what I was sensing was some kind of psychological imprint rather than anything supernatural or threatening. During college, I deliberately chose dormitory rooms with modern furniture and concrete floors, eliminating the shadowy spaces that had haunted my childhood dreams. I learned to sleep with soft music playing, the sound masking whatever noises my anxious mind might interpret as evidence of otherworldly residence. But even as an adult, established in my own career in healthcare administration and living in a contemporary apartment with rational explanations for every sound and shadow, the memory of that presence lingered. I told myself it was merely superstition, a harmless quirk that hurt no one and actually provided interesting conversation in dinner parties. The apartment I eventually purchased was a ground-floor unit in a modern complex, chosen specifically for its lack of historical character and supernatural ambiance. The bedroom was bright and practical, with large windows, built-in storage, and a platform bed that sat directly on the floor. I had finally created a sleeping environment that eliminated every possible hiding space for whatever had tormented my childhood nights. For 5 years, I lived in that apartment without incident. Last Tuesday changed everything. I had followed my usual evening routine without deviation. I had just settled under my covers, reaching for the bedside lamp to click it off, when I heard something that stopped my heart. A soft voice, barely above a whisper, coming from somewhere near the foot of my bed.
Please don't be afraid.
This wasn't the familiar hum of appliances or the distant sounds of neighbors. This was a human voice, speaking directly to me, from a location that should have been impossible. My hand froze on the lamp switch, every nerve in my body suddenly alert with the kind of primal terror I hadn't experienced since childhood.
I know you can hear me. I've been trying to get your attention for days, but I didn't want to frighten you.
The voice was young, probably female, and carried an odd formality that suggested careful consideration of each word. There was no threat in the tone, no menace or aggression, but the mere fact of its existence in my supposedly secure bedroom was terrifying enough to make my hands shake uncontrollably.
My name is Elena. I live here too, but in a different way than you do. I've been watching over this place for a very long time.
You're not real, I said, as much to convince myself as to address the voice. This is stress or medication or some kind of psychological episode. A soft laugh, barely audible but unmistakably amused, drifted through the darkness.
I understand why you would think that. Most people who can hear me assume they're imagining things. It's easier than accepting that reality is more complex than we usually admit.
Despite my terror, I found myself curious about the matter-of-fact way Elena discussed the situation. She spoke like someone accustomed to being doubted but patient enough to work through skepticism with careful explanation. If you're real, I said, surprised by my own willingness to engage in conversation with what might be a hallucination. Where are you? Why can't I see you?
I'm here,
Elena replied, and suddenly I felt a gentle pressure on the edge of my mattress, as if someone had sat down beside me.
But I exist in spaces between things, between sleeping and waking. between one moment and the next, between what people think is possible and what actually is.
The philosophical nature of her response was unexpected, suggesting an intelligence and education that made the entire experience even more surreal. This wasn't the rambling of a delusional mind or the threatening demands of a dangerous intruder. This was something, attempting to explain concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. "You're the presence I felt as a child," I said suddenly, the realization hitting me with startling clarity. "In the old house on Maple Street. You were there too."
Yes. You were so frightened then, but also so brave. You never told anyone about our conversations.
The statement confused me because I had no memory of any conversations with Elena during my childhood. I remembered the fear, the sleepless nights, the desperate attempts to convince my parents that something lived in my room. But I had no recollection of actually communicating with whatever presence I had sensed. "We didn't talk when I was a child," I said uncertainly. "I was too scared to do anything but hide under my covers."
Not with words, but you listened when I sang to you during the worst nights. You let me stay close when the thunderstorms came and your parents were at the hospital with your brother. You shared your space even when you were afraid, and that kindness meant more than you could know.
As she spoke, memories began surfacing that I had forgotten or dismissed as childhood fantasies. There had been nights during my brother's longest hospitalization when I felt less alone despite being physically isolated in that big old house. Times when storms had raged outside, but I had somehow felt protected and comforted by a presence I couldn't name or explain. Moments when anxiety about my brother's medical procedures and experimental treatments had been soothed by something that felt like invisible arms wrapping around me in the darkness. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What are you? Why are you here?"
I'm what some people might call a guardian. I watch over places and people who need protection, especially during times of transition and stress. Your family needed that kind of support when you lived on Maple Street, with all the medical challenges you were facing. And you need it again now, though for different reasons.
The mention of needing protection sparked immediate concern. "Am I in danger? Is something going to happen?"
Not the kind of danger you're thinking of. But you've been carrying a lot of worry lately about the experimental treatment program you're working on. The pressure to secure funding, the responsibility you feel toward the families who are counting on these new therapies, the fear that your efforts might not be enough to help the children who need it.
Her accurate assessment of my current professional anxieties was both comforting and unsettling. I had indeed been struggling with the weight of responsibility that came with my role in pharmaceutical development, particularly my work with experimental treatments for pediatric conditions similar to what my brother had faced years earlier. "How do you know about that?" I asked.
I pay attention. When you care about people the way you do, when you dedicate your life to healing, helping others, that creates a kind of light that those of us who exist in the spaces between can see.
"I can handle it," I said automatically, the response I gave everyone who expressed concern about my workload.
You can, but you don't have to handle it alone. That's why I'm here.
Over the following hour, Elena and I talked about everything. Elena shared stories of other people she had watched over during difficult times. She listened with the kind of attention that made me feel truly heard, asking questions that helped me clarify my own thoughts and feelings.
I have to go, but I'll still be here, watching over you and this place. When the pressure becomes too much, when you feel alone in your efforts to help others, remember that healing work is never done in isolation.
"Will I see you again?" I asked, surprised by how much I hoped the answer would be yes.
When you need me, and when you're ready to accept that some forms of support come from places we don't fully understand.
After she was gone, I lay in my bed watching the sunrise paint my familiar bedroom walls with golden light. My childhood terror had been transformed into adult wisdom, the understanding that we are all watched over by forces we cannot fully comprehend, that healing work is always supported by connections that transcend physical reality. Elena had been my guardian angel, disguised as a childhood fear, waiting patiently for me to be ready to receive the support and encouragement I needed. The thing I feared under my bed wasn't a monster at all. It was someone who never left me protecting, guiding, holding me together in ways I couldn't see. And through her, I learned that real healing isn't about being strong alone. It's about realizing we're never truly alone in our fight to ease the world's pain. And if this story touched you, subscribe to my channel, because there are more truths like this waiting for you.